So before we get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to the London Stock Exchange, to Andrew and the team. This is the third year I'm attending, and very excited about this year because it's every year I come back, and in such a short span of 12 months, so many things have changed. And of course, one of the things that has changed over the last 12 months is the rapid adoption of generative AI. And with that, I'd love to hear a little bit from my fellow panelists about yourself and your startup and what business problem you're trying to solve. Brief introduction would be great, starting with yourself.
Cool. Hey everyone, so Stefan Kruger. I'm the VP of Engineering at Paystack. I think payments is a big problem in Africa, which everyone's trying to solve. So we're trying to simplify payments and grow the GDP of the internet in Africa as a whole. Yeah.
I'm Ed Fricker. I'm Director of Platform Engineering at Smile ID. We're the largest identity verification service in Africa. Similarly, we're trying to grow GDP by giving access to everyone to financial services or anything that they need by proving who they are.
Cool. Good morning, everybody. I'm Dave Evans. I'm CTPO for pawaPay. We are one of the largest mobile money payment aggregators in Africa, and really focusing on growth of digital commerce throughout the whole continent.
Fantastic. So the first kind of question / debate I'd like to kick us off with is, over the last few years, we've seen many emerging technologies, and some of them have stuck around, and we've seen adoption continue to grow within them, and others have come through as fads and faded away. And I think a question that keeps coming up with with startups we work with investors we work with, and across the media, definitely is this technology here to stay? Is it a fad, a cycle? I would love to get some of your thoughts, each of your individual thoughts on this and what you're seeing so far.
Yeah, I think, I think that many technologies kind of come and go. The application to business and the value it brings to our business is important. If I think about AI, where it is right now in its kind of infancy, I think it's kind of a race to the end of who's going to win the best LLM, the cheapest hardware. And I think for startups especially, there's going to be a new layer where people productize the AI to bring optimization to business. So if we think about mundane tasks, everyday tasks, like for my role specifically, I spend 80% of my time consuming data and then making a decision based on that. If I had something that can take that data, aggregate it, and give me a small bullet summary, it makes it easier for me to make decisions. I think where we are in the stages of AI right now, it's still very immature. It's not at a mature stage yet, so it's not yet at a place where we can actually rely on it to make the correct decisions. But it can be applied in business to kind of solve internal problems, optimize your business. A lot of kind of manual tasks can be automated through generative AI. So I think the foundation for me is it's definitely there to stay, but I think it's something we need to carefully look at where it is in its life cycle. I don't think we can augment customer experience with products yet in that space. But keen to hear what the rest of it.
I think I'd agree with that. I think in terms of sort of internal business process, it's a thing that can give you an edge or an extra 10, 20, 30% or whatever. I think it's going to stick around. It's not going to go. It's going to change because people are still searching through it, discovering it, figuring out those use cases, figuring out the market fit for stuff. And I think it's something that you're going to have to keep playing with within your business to figure out what works for you. So yeah, I think it's probably the best I can say on that.
I think we're living in really exciting times. I think from a grizzled old technologist, I'm still finding AI is actually quite magical in some of the output it produces. Some of it's disastrous, but some of it is really amazing. And I think we're in that stage of its technology evolution where everyone's trying to tack on AI to their product name, but I think there's some really strong use cases that we can discuss as we go forward that are really coming out. I think for us as a payments platform, it's really important to get a yes or no answer and not a maybe answer in transactions. So I think where we apply it, we have to be quite careful. But I think we are living in incredibly exciting times. Whether it's a generational change in our tech stack, I think it's yet to be proven, but I think it certainly is one of those discontinuities when we change how we do things.
Yeah, I think when I think about your business, even on the Paystack side, there's so many use cases within fintech where probably you're already using some sort of ML solutions, and now there's this additional tech that has emerged and allows you to go deeper, expand those use cases. I'd love to hear about, maybe already where you're using it, but also how you think about prioritizing the next use case or where you plan to invest time. Because I know you could also get lost and spread resources thin, and you want to make sure your teams are delivering the most impactful things on the roadmap. As exciting as it is to work with some of this tech, you already kind of touched on it, Dave, it has to tie back to the business, whether that's accelerating conversion or the top line or really improving productivity to move the needle on cost as you deliver back to the business stakeholders. So maybe, Dave, you can kick us off and give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, I'm seeing it, we're using AI, I would say, in 3 really different domains. So the first one is personal productivity, be that for developers to be more productive in their output, be it marketeers, be it sales in creating content or focusing on their opportunities. So I think almost like the best personal assistant you could have. And I think there's a real very good use case there, particularly as it's quite difficult to recruit great talent. So if you can get your great talent being more productive, then that's a massive impact for us. The next stage for us is then also how do we leverage our internal data and make it much more accessible to everybody in the business. We sort of coined the phrase, the pawaPay mind. How do we surface all of the knowledge that we have in the business and make it very accessible to support staff, to our consultants, to our developers. And I think that's a real sweet spot, because you don't have to have absolutely the correct answer, because you've always got the opportunity to validate and check it later. And then we're starting now into customer focused products on AI. We've done what everybody else is doing, which is really looking at chatbots, how we can improve a customer support experience, how we can, we've integrated into Discord so we can support our customers who are integrating our platform to give them advice on how to use the API. And again, that's great because it can be an evolving conversation. So you can deal with the fact that you may get the wrong answer coming through from the AI side and resolve it later. But the big learning I've had is you've really got to get your data right. We're hitting our Confluence documents, we're hitting our Google Docs, and those docs have never been written to be consumed by AI. So I think as we evolve, we need to get better at producing content that AI can make better use of.
That's really helpful, David. Ed, we spoke a little bit about your take on this, and there's always two sides of the coin. And the use of AI can be to drive high impact business outcomes. On the other side, we do see some bad actors. How do you think about that, especially in your business around verification?
Yeah, essentially, Smile has been using ML since its inception, and we've got some really great ML engineers in the team. Creating our own models to verify people's faces and detect fraud, and then we see through the millions of transactions we get a month the new uses of the generative AI to the other side of it is to deepfake people and to try and impersonate and try and fool our own models. So it's an arms race between our ML and everyone else's, and we're looking seeing the white papers that are coming out and seeing the new uses and the new techniques that people have to try and do this stuff, which could potentially be used for fraud, and we're training our MLs to detect that. So yeah, it's interesting that we use it internally, like Dave was saying, for personal productivity and to help with customer support and all this sort of stuff. but there's also the flip side of trying to fight against it. So,
Yeah. Thanks for that, Stefan. Would love your take on how you're using it in the business and how you really see it evolve.
Yeah, I think similarly to Dave, I think the use case internally in kind of optimizing the business is kind of core. But I agree 100%. I think, doing semantic search on internal documentation, like you need to have very clear kind of structures in documentation. I think where I've seen real value is customer support coming in. It can take unstructured data and it can understand it and augment it in a way that you can get parameters out and you can feed it tasks. So I think kind of prompt engineering is probably where the most value sits internally in businesses right now. So I mean, we're looking at kind of an internal Slack bot which services employees. So I mean, in any kind of scaling business, I think running a business 10 people, 50 people is okay. When it grows larger than that, context becomes very complex to kind of share across the border cases. So having an AI being able to aggregate that information to a new joiner speeds up that onboarding process and makes them valuable a lot sooner. Engineering-wise as well, so I still program every day. It helps me significantly in kind of the mundane tasks of kind of searching for certain things, which I think is very important. But yeah, I think internally, I think we're still very much exploring the internal use cases. We've not really gone to look at product-facing and augmenting product kind of side of things. I mean, on the sales pipelines, there's a lot of work we do kind of evaluating kind of customers. Sales agents, we can pull a lot of information and get context on merchants or new customers to kind of help with sales pitches, etc. going forward. So yeah, so those are the things we're kind of focusing on.
Awesome. Hani, it'd be great to hear a quick introduction about yourself, your business, what problem you're trying to solve. And then also the second follow-up question, what we've been discussing is, how are you thinking about the use of AI or Gen AI solutions within your company and how your team is leveraging it or not leveraging it and why?
Thank you so much. First of all, let me apologize for being passionately late. So my name is Ogundeyi. I'm the founder and CEO at Edukoya. We're an online education technology company building sort of the future of online learning for African learners all around the world. And just in terms of speaking around Gen AI, I think was the sort of primary question. I think for us, it's impossible to sort of be building in education and online learning and technology and not be excited about the possibilities of what you can do with Gen AI. When I started Edukoya in 2021, a lot of the things that we've been talking about, which is basically how do you make education more affordable, more accessible, more personalized to every learner, particularly how do you level the playing field? How do you allow a learner in Africa to basically have the same quality of education someone in the US or in the UK has? Now, those things, when I talked about it in 21, speaking to investors and speaking to industry experts, were largely almost impossible. It was very much a big vision of how to do that. But today, just with the advent of AI and this technology, you can start to see glimpses of how that is beginning to be possible. And I think that's one of, it's an incredibly exciting time to be building. For us in our business, we're definitely looking at it. In 22, we launched a product in Nigeria where we connected learners in K-12, so primary and secondary school, to teachers to just be able to speak to them about homework or get reinforcement, because typically many students in Africa are in school, the small percentage are in school. We have the most out of school children in Nigeria, but those who are in school are typically what I call underlearning. So people are just in school, but they're not meeting any of the literacy or mathematical sort of metrics. And that product was wildly successful, but just really impossible to scale, because how do you continue to find lots of good quality teachers who we can trust to provide real-time learning? But then today, we're now looking at rolling out that product with Gen AI. If we look at where the technology is now, you can basically be confident. I mean, you have to build different guardrails in, look at different models. I'm particularly fascinated by just looking at understanding how we can, memory is only going to get better, the cognitive personality of the models and the agents. So for us, I'm particularly just excited to be building in this generation. I think it's a once in a lifetime sort of opportunity to be rolling out and thinking about how to implement this. And I think for Africa, it's even more relevant. I think it will, for us, basically we talk about leapfrog. Anyone building Africa, we say leapfrog like 5 million times. But I think this is the real leapfrog that we've been talking about. I think we're going to see real transformational products that can really change lives and outcomes for people in Nigeria and Africa. So yes, thank you.
Thanks for that, Hani. I think that leads us to well into the next topic. I think, we talked a little bit about how you're planning to use it, the excitement around it, the use cases that make sense. And I'd love all of your perspective, because on this one I tend to get mixed feedback when it comes to the blockers for more rapid adoption. Some of the anecdotes I hear is it's around skills and skill availability, and other anecdotes I hear around cost, because folks think they actually need to go out and build these capital intensive models, which in many cases I think is not the case. But I'd love to hear, from your perspective, what you're seeing so far, whether within your own teams or within your ecosystems, on what the blockers are to faster adoption. Is it really the skills piece? Is it the CapEx/financial piece, or is it something else? Or is it direction from the top? Or it could be,
It's always direction from the top. In terms of my thoughts, I think there's a couple of areas to it. I think there's change, cultural change, and I'm certainly seeing within some of our more senior engineers a reluctance to embrace Gen AI in their daily tasks. They can easily point to lots of mistakes and lots of errors in Gen AI code production. And they take great pride in what they do themselves. So they see it almost like a de-skilling of their roles. So I think in engineering teams, I'm seeing quite a cultural pushback against adoption of Gen AI. I think there is definitely a skills gap, and I think there's also an organizational challenge as well. If I think back to big data, as a CTO, I had to think, how do I add big data skills into my engineering team? I think most of us have put in dedicated data engineering teams alongside your existing development teams. It's not clear yet whether AI skills needs to be embedded within your every engineer, or whether it needs to be a separate team who build out those skill sets. But I think until we get really competent at Gen AI internally in our engineering teams, we won't see the revolution in our customer-focused products. I think we need to have that skill set in-house, and I don't think we're quite there yet. And then cost. Every SaaS product is now adding $5, $10 per head, to add AI to their product set. So we're seeing our SaaS cost base increasing, and certainly on the cloud-based side, more and more costs are going into there to support the massive computational aspects that need to be done within Gen AI.
Thanks for that. Ed, do you want to share your...
Yeah, I think similar to Dave, I guess, like on the consumption front of using things like Copilot or Code Whisperer or something, there's mixed take-up within our engineering team. I use it a lot because, we do a vast range of things across many different languages and different services, and sometimes if I can't remember the right syntax for doing this particular thing, it's just like getting someone to predict it for me, a virtual rubber duck, I find very useful. But there are some engineers who are a bit more resistant, but I think it's just going to come, as those technologies improve, that resistance is going to have to fade. In terms of the skills within the team, I guess we're slightly different in terms of we've always had a dedicated ML team within Smile, who are very much in that space and just know it inside and out. Those skills somewhat percolate around the rest of the team, I guess, but it is a specific skill set, and we try and mix things around, and people work across the whole stack, but it's definitely a challenge finding the engineers who know ML inside and out and AI, and can also ship good code, which is a key function of the business, and it's we are hiring for ML engineers if anyone is out there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's two very different layers. So if we look at kind of building an ML, training an ML, there's a very specific skill set, like you mentioned. What we've seen with AI kind of, taking adoption is that those skill sets become rare and they become expensive, like we kind of see in the industry, right? So it becomes very hard to try and find those engineers to kind of build that. But the reality is that there's a layer being productized on top of these open source MLs. So the discussion is more around prompt engineering and how do you train, because the prompt engineering can be any language, doesn't need to be Python, doesn't have to be specific language or structures. So how do we kind of train our engineers to think through prompt engineering? And how do we kind of validate against those sort of things? So I think from a product perspective, internal perspective, it's not a hard skill to train, and I think it's very easy to adopt that. I think everyone kind of looks at AI as this big black box and kind of goes like, I don't quite know how to kind of get. And I think as time goes on and as prompt engineering becomes a little bit more visible, people will engage slightly bit more. I think there is a huge cost barrier to it. And when we kind of talk about data privacy, customer data, merchant data, you can't share that externally into a third-party AI, which makes it harder to internally kind of, do I host my own model, do I build my own model, do I train my own model, and what's the cost aspects of those things? I think cost at the moment on hardware, AWS is highly inflated because it's a big hype. And, you can do the same thing with a new MacBook in your office and you can kind of run the same sort of thing. So I think there's skill sets to be learned to be able to deploy those things in a cost-efficient way internally. The reality is, any organization, or small organizations like Paystack, doesn't necessarily need a ChatGPT or the power of ChatGPT. We can specialize in different models, understanding what those models do. So I think there's a lot of learning that has to happen, everywhere for everyone to kind of find that tangible ways to adopt the technology internally. In terms of coding, what I find with the engineers is there's mundane tasks like writing tests. Like that is probably the easiest what they do, right? That's a function, write a test, and it spits out tests. So I think there is optimization engineering teams that helps. But absolutely, I think the senior engineers do feel a little bit threatened by it coming out. And obviously it's not accurate, but if it's writing 99 of 100 lines of code and one's wrong, it's easier for you to kind of fix that than it is spending 100 time writing 100 lines of code.
I think if you've got a good senior engineer, they can utilize it in a better way because they know that wrong line. Exactly. And they can pick it out and be like, that saved me 10 minutes or whatever. But if it's doing that 6 times a day, it's like, it's an hour.
Yeah.
Fascinating insights. Any?
No, I think much the same experience. I think we're finding the same, just different adaptation across the engineering team. I think for us it's a bit different because we're building actually an AI product for education, so you don't really get the option to opt out. So it's a bit different there. But yeah, definitely seeing the same thing and then just cost-wise, having to really learn around the implications and what that looks like, especially if you're building something that is quite conversational and chat-based, and managing that, and then you have managing that across Naira costs. So it's it's an interesting paradigm to sort of want to provide that, but having to manage all of those assets together. So very much nothing I think additionally new from our side.
I think we'll start to see an emerging challenge, which would be that junior developers, the work that they would normally cut their teeth on is now being done more effectively by generative AI. So what will the new generation of engineers become? Will they be much more no-code prompt engineering, or much more focused on the business problems that they're trying to solve, rather than the actual technical task of writing code? And I think we'll see a big discontinuity, a big challenge over the next few years between students coming out of university who want to get onto the technology ladder, and actually the spaces aren't there to take them on, because all that work of form design or basic development is all being done by Gen AI.
But isn't that just the general evolution of programming?
Yeah.
So when I started, I did low-level C. Now when I look at engineers, what they're doing is literally just like putting libraries together, frameworks together. Yeah. Like all the complexity is already taken out. So the evolution over time has kind of predicted that already.
Yeah. I think what people are underestimating is the time that's going to be. I think it's going to be much shorter than we think.
Yeah.
So this is fantastic because you already led me into the next question. I don't know how you're reading my mind. Despite the panelists' best efforts, I did not share this question and other questions because we wanted an unscripted panel. So you led us directly into there, which is, folks are drawing all kinds of parallels to new innovations we've seen in the past. In certain instances, I've heard about parallels to the calculator, to Microsoft Excel, and I can go on. And I think, from my side, generally optimist, and I see that in most cases these have significantly improved productivity, and we've found other things to do to be even more productive if history rhymes. But I would love, a little bit of your perspective. You're already kind of leading into it, as to how you see things over the next 5 to 10 years, and how our engineering teams, engineering and product teams, how they'll be set up, how they'll function, and what skills will be most important. You alluded to prompt engineering. You talked about it already a little bit, Dave. So I'd love to hear from each of you, how you see that evolution and your predictions.
I've probably lived through any number of great white hopes for a CEO to be able to dictate a paragraph and get a system produced automatically into their computing systems. And I think this is the current great white hope of such an evolution. I think for a product business, we need to, as an engineering team, become much more focused on on making those solutions as easy to adopt and as easy to engage with, and as scalable and as reliable. And I think we'll see a lot of product businesses investing heavily in AI to really move that forward. And I think it will be quicker than it won't be 5 years. It'll be like this year or next year. And actually, we'll need to build greater competence and greater expertise internally in those product teams, be they product owners or engineers, to deliver on that. I think the tool sets we use will become much more productive to use. If we look at Copilot now, that's much more productive as a coding IDE. But we will start to see those low-code and no-code solutions. But somebody has to build those low-code and no-code solutions. And that's what a product organization does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I'd echo that in terms of, you kind of touched on it, years ago we used to write level C or assembler or whatever, and now we're at next level abstraction. And this will be the next level on top of that. So it's not going to detract from anything. It's going to increase the speed at which we deliver stuff, increase the complexity of the products that we deliver, increase the scale at which we can do stuff. And that will involve a change in mindset in the engineering teams to operate at that higher level, to not necessarily think about, this function is running particularly slow, but it's about how your systems are interacting. Or I think there will be an evolution in terms of the AI, in terms of how we monitor and observe our systems as well, because as these things scale and explode and grow, that complexity will grow, and we'll still need to have that human interaction to know that the system's falling over or failing or it's running slow or whatever. And I'm an optimist as well, and I can see that it is going to explode in a good way, and it will involve people exploding with it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think if I think about the most innovative technology ever built or product ever built, it's built on compassion. It's built on a problem that people feel from a day-to-day basis. The reality, AI is never going to feel that. There's no way that AI is going to sit in a box somewhere and predict, or build a product, innovate in a product. So I think as kind of product leaders and engineering leaders, the role will shift from the execution to the vision and the structuring side of things. It's very similar to having a race car. If you don't know how to drive it, it's not going to go anywhere. So I see AI as being a race car, but you need to give it guidance. You need to give it guidelines, you give it processes and structure for it to actually execute down the path. So I think we'll see a lot more innovation coming out in the product landscape and problems being solved a lot quicker, which is all we want, especially in Africa, right? We want to solve, complex problems very quickly. I think it'll get us there very quickly, but it's about us as kind of leaders to give it frameworks to get us there. I think that's where we'll spend the majority of our time.
Awesome.
I think people have avoided your cost for time. Nobody wants to be quoted. I think much the same. I think there's a whole school of thought that thinks software engineering is going away, and I don't think that it's that at all. I think it's more optimistic. I actually think that we'll build more sort of complex software now, because the range of the possibilities are just exponentially so much more available. So I think actually it might be the opposite, and a lot of things will get more expensive because the possibility of what we can build is a lot bigger. I think things like product managers and engineers will probably be merged into one, and we'll see a lot more product engineering roles where you need someone who understands explicitly the two. So I think we'll start to see, I think the way that we structure our teams and product engineering teams will actually change dramatically now. And I think I'm one of those people that if we work the world, we're going to get AGI at some point, and I have sort of a date in my head when I think. And if we work backwards from that to just see how much time do we have to do things in the way that we're doing it, and at which point is it just going to look dramatically different from how we're all thinking about how we're going to do it. And so if you kind of work with that sort of play an optimistic, pessimistic sort of role in your head, it kind of, one, brings an urgency to how I build today and how I think about building, and also how I just mentally invest in things, because then I just think, well, this is probably just going to look radically different in another 3 to 5 years. And then you sort of proceed in that way. But I think it's exciting time. I like the word around explosions. People talk about the comparison to calculators. I like the one where they talk about inventing the atomic bomb and what that looks like. So it's just going to be an explosion, I think, in terms of innovation and what we can do. I think as builders, I think for me, it feels like we're in the era of, when the internet first came. So what better time to be building?
I think we'll also see a bit of a divergence in skill sets from a very, sort of product engineer who's focused very much on the business problem or the customer problem that we're trying to solve, but also still having those really in-depth engineers who knows fundamentally how this stuff is working. That we're actually storing bits on a disk somewhere over a network, and when you're not getting the performance you want, you need to be able to have somebody or a group of people say, oh yeah, that's the problem, and that's where we need to be focused on solving the problem. I mean, particularly in Africa, we see on the payment side, we see massively scaling transaction volumes. Sometimes you'll have very few transactions going through, and other times you'll have millions of transactions going through. And you need the real hardcore engineers who know fundamentally how that works. And in AWS's environment, is how you might think it's always all a cloud, but fundamentally there's machines in a data center connected by wires that you need to know how those work.
I think that comes back to another point of knowing when the AI gets it wrong. In terms of the engineers, or product engineers, or whatever, need to have a really fundamental, good grasp of the basics of, data structures and algorithms and things, to know that what the AI has written for us is going to be performant. It's not good. When you run this 100 times is great, but when you do it 10 million times, is it going to cost us $10 million or all that sort of stuff? So yeah, I think knowing those fundamentals is still going to be key, no matter what level of abstraction we're going to be at.
But I think that if you focus on how it's getting things wrong today, I think that's still very much looking at how it looks like today. Mm-hmm. It's going to get less things wrong. Very quickly. Yeah.
We have all optimists on the panel.
Publicly.
So there's one more question I want to ask to make sure that we give time to folks to ask questions. And I think, you spoke a little bit about parallels to the internet and many other technologies that have come up. Now, with those learnings in mind, all of your businesses have scaled to a certain extent, are operating in multiple segments, multiple countries. For folks that are earlier on in their journey, with this technology now kind of emerged, what advice would you give them in terms of setting up their teams, scaling their teams, and how to think about it with some of those learnings under your belt already?
I'm happy to pick that one up. I think it's, what do I think? I think it's, it splits into two camps. You've got how can AI supplement and support what our vision is today? And how does AI transform it into something completely different? So enable something completely new that we haven't thought about. And I think that's, for startups, that's clearly where you need to work out the vision. I think also I would really, if I was doing this very early stage startup, I'd be looking to build the skill sets in-house, because I think there's huge capital value in having a skilled AI team internally. And that may take some time in terms of upskilling or recruitment, but I think that asset will be a massive asset for growth going forward, rather than sort of pushing it out elsewhere. But I think you probably need to rephrase your problem domain in terms of how does Gen AI impact this, because if you're not thinking about it, your competitors will be.
Makes sense. Do you want to go next?
I guess I am. Yeah, I think the value of any startup or company historically has been about the people that are within it and how they can execute on a vision and, you know, bring a product to market or, you know, get sales out there to make the company a success and grow. And I think the power that Gen AI gives you is to, you know, add a multiple on top of that. If you've got the right people in place in the first place, then yeah, it's gonna 2x it or 5x it or whatever. If you've got the wrong people in place, it might go the other way. So I think echoing what Dave said about, you know, having those skills in house is going to be key. I think if your vision or, you know, product that you want to build is Gen AI related, then it's foolish not to have that stuff in house. Because yeah, it is going to transform a lot of things.
I think I'd probably say, you know, especially with smaller kind of early stage startups, is experiment. Allow your team members to experiment. Lean into the SaaS products for $10 because it's inexpensive for people to learn on that type of front, and understand really where the application of your business would be, because it is a massive kind of a capital investment. It's a skill set investment. It's a culture investment. So the sooner you get your teams to experiment more with the tools that are out there and open source, the easier the adoption internally would be. I mean, the worst you can do right now is have a big AI team internally, build this bot, and no one adopts it.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a culture shift. It's going to be a mindset shift. And people need to understand fully, you know, how do I actually use it in my day-to-day life? You know, when I look at my dad, who's a 70-year-old, if I tell him about AI, he's like, oh, I just asked about the weather. I'm like, but you know, you can use it for your day-to-day tasks, like summarize the news for me. So, and people don't really think like that anymore. Like, I think it's going to be that kind of mind shift and a culture shift in people to kind of adopt it internally.
I think it's very difficult to make a big bet today on the technology. I think we're in this massive evolution phase where there's lots of interesting stuff coming up and interesting developments, and the pace of development is so fast that during the startup I'd try to avoid having too much lock into a particular technology. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's, not to plug AWS, but I think it's great that they're running multiple LLM supports within the Bedrock platform, which means actually you can't bet on the winner today, or if you do, it is a bet. It's like a horse race. Sorry,
No, that's fine. I mean, I think much of what has been said. I think what's great if you're starting a company today is that you can probably do more with less. Mm-hmm. You probably don't need, you know, big teams. Probably we're going to see the advent of sort of 2-3 person teams building things that we think previously not possible. So I think from that perspective, it's a great time to be building. I think also another thing is just the possibility to imagine new things and be able to solve new things in more creative ways. And really, I am actually surprised we're not seeing a lot more business model innovation just in terms of how people are potentially looking to charge for things in new products, if we're looking at SaaS, etc. So, and as what you said in terms of being able to rely on sort of new SaaS tools to be able to build and test things out quite quickly. So smaller teams take as much advantage of what exists, and I think don't be afraid to sort of explore new ways. Look, you know, particularly if you're building a Gen AI product, looking at new ways in which you might possibly want to charge and make more money.
What do you have in mind with the charge? Is it like a tokenized GPU usage?
I'm thinking, I was surprised.
Because that's super interesting.
I'm surprised that we're not seeing more of that. I was looking into a product recently, and then I looked, and it was still just a normal standard.
Yeah.
I was like,
per seat, and
I just thought, well, no. I think there's so much more interesting use cases that you could look into. So if we're paying in, you know, various tokens, you know, why more people not? But I think it's super early and no one understands that, so we're just still reverting to what we know. But I think the more that we see sort of younger teams who are probably less grounded in the old way of doing things, as we're going to be called soon. We'll see more sort of experimentation and then probably an explosion of that. It's one of those things that it'll evolve quite quickly, I think.
Fascinating. Great discussion. Thank you all for your insights. I wanted to save some time to open it up to the room for questions for the panelists. We'll start over there. I think we need to get a mic.
Hi. That was super interesting, thanks. My name's Regina. A lot of you talked about bringing Gen AI skills in-house. And I was wondering if you're a company anywhere really with a remote team and you're looking to hire a Gen AI team from the continent, do you guys have any advice on where to look?
If you solve the problem, let us know.
Yeah.
Share the website.
There are people out there. Like with any hiring, you've got to be careful because, bring the wrong person on and it can be a detriment. But yeah, it's hard, but there are people out there.
Are you saying it's harder in Africa than it is in Europe?
I think it's harder for an African startup to hire in Europe based on the cost basis. So trying to find that local talent is hard.
So if you're a European firm looking for African-based talent.
Tunisia.
To what?
Serious. 8 universities for AI.
I think there's lots. So we're a fully remote business, and so we look for talent everywhere, which has its opportunities, has its challenges. The recruitment process becomes quite interesting. I'm just looking at a company out of America that's using AI to do the first up technical interviews with engineers to filter before they come through to human engineers, and they do some really quite interesting stuff. I think there's areas in Africa that are becoming really hot in terms of tech hubs, lots of community meetups and activities going on. I think as a European startup, you need to try and plug yourself into those areas to start to see the local talent and get into those sort of those tech hubs, and that will be driven by where you as a startup want to focus. So we work in Nairobi, Kenya, we work in Tanzania, we're looking at Ghana, we're looking at Rwanda, we're looking at Nigeria as all potential sort of tech hubs that could start to provide really talented people in the African continent.
Right. Just to be clear, I was specifically about Gen AI talent. I'm just wondering if there are pools of talent concentrated on the continent, or if that's actually quite difficult to find.
Well, I can't talk about Tunisia. I haven't seen real hotspots at the moment in Africa on that subject.
Yeah, I think it's just so early that it's hard to it's just so early. So there's pockets of activity happening across the continent in different variations, and depending on where you're plugged in, you're probably seeing a little bit of that. I wouldn't say that it's advanced enough that we could probably definitely say this country is a Gen AI hotspot at the moment. I think things like that are continuing to evolve, and maybe in the next couple of years we might be able to answer that a little bit better. But at the moment, it just feels like pockets of activity. Like literally yesterday, I was looking at some Nigerian kid who was trying to build a local LLM, and he'd run. It's a lot like that. It's like in the early days of the internet, asking someone to pick the next Google. It's like we don't know. But there's lots of things happening, and I think that if you're, my team is fully distributed, is remote. We have Nigerian engineers who are now working with AI every day, and we have people from other parts of the world doing the same. And you'll start to see pockets of all those guys moving and then becoming more available and working with more people. So I think it's just early.
Yeah, I think it's also important to hone down which part of the value chain you're trying to hire for, right? All the way from building these FMs, which the hotspots tend to be these research hubs that we've seen, in France, in UK, in the US, and in certain cases in South Africa. Now in other parts of Africa, it's still early. And then the other part of the other end of the scale is folks that have to drive adoption of these models and these tools. So it really depends where on the value chain you're talking about. Obviously, On the FM side, it's harder, and you really have to hone in on these research centers. Is the trends we've seen so far, from my perspective.
Yeah. So interesting session so far. I would like to kind of think a bit more external, right? So I'm a founder, and as a founder, I had to be strategic. Think more about the market as well. And I'm saying this because this is my belief, and I believe I'm correct, that when there's new technology that is accessible to many, and the technology gets cheaper, then it changes the competitive landscape, right? So, and I think I'll pick on what Oni said, that it's maybe easier to build. How does that change competition, right? What then becomes differentiation? What becomes getting ahead or being ahead? How do you think about that? If my competitor is as excited as this, I'm also excited, everybody is excited, we are all building, then who wins, right? So maybe the question is, one, how does this change the competitive landscape? Two is, how do you even think in this new age for you to be competitive in this space? Because it's looking cheaper to build and easier to build.
So before we jump in, I just want to make sure I understood the question correctly. Is the question, where is the winner going to lie, and with these barriers of coming down in terms of using this technology? Yeah. Or I want to make sure it's specific so that we give you the best answer possible.
How do you win? We all have access to Gen AI. You're here, right? I can come to you, get the service as well. So who wins, right? In other words, how do you have a differentiated product in this space?
From my perspective, it's important to work backwards from the customer and understand your use case, to then answer your follow-up question of how you win, because it really depends on that. And in certain cases, it really depends on the business model. There are businesses out there that use models that are readily available without fine-tuning them, without customizing them, without building their own model, that rely heavily on the strength of the brand that they've built. And then you have businesses on the total other end of the scale that have built these closed-loop models, proprietary, with their own data, that don't open it up. So in one case, you have an edge winner that's done solely on branding and the strength of their brand and marketing. On the other hand, you have someone that's built their entire closed-loop model based on proprietary data. So it really depends on the customer use case that you're trying to solve for, is my perspective.
I think it's a continuation of the theme that we've seen over the last number of decades, which is the ability to maintain a product feature advantage is becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. So I think that will continue because Gen AI will allow those features to be developed very, very quickly and deployed very, very quickly. So that doesn't discount every other element of competition. So your business model can become much more innovative, or your pricing model, your market reach, your position in your value chain, your knowledge of your customers and their problem sets. So I think all those pieces will still exist in a new world of Gen AI. I think it'll be more difficult to maintain an ongoing, persistent product feature position. But on the other side of that, when you look at big technology discontinuities, you see that some of the early adopters maintain an advantage because they've got up the experience curve much faster. So you look at Google in the search space, if you look at Tesla in the electric vehicle space, they're maintaining an advantage by being there first and going through that learning curve earlier than their competition. So I would say that the existing strategic drivers of why you'll be successful aren't going to change, but I think your time where you can take advantage of product feature benefit is going to be shortened.
Yeah, I think it's, I kind of touched on earlier, it's almost like a force multiplier, in that if you are 2% ahead of your competitor at the moment and you both adopt Gen AI, then you're going to be 20% ahead of them. But if they tweak the business model or some other fundamentals which mean they were now ahead of you, then with Gen AI they're going to be even further ahead of you. So yeah, it's going to, if everyone has it, there's not a differentiator there. The differentiators there are still everything else going on in your business. And sure, there are going to be new markets and new opportunities solely around AI and ML and all this other stuff. Like with the internet, people started their stuff on the internet and like Google and became absolutely huge. Other businesses that were bricks and mortar then went onto the internet, and they scaled further than they could before. So it's probably, I see it as a sort of a similar kind of effect.
I think we have time for one more. Go for it.
With me?
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Aaron. I'm American, so I can just talk that. Honey, you touched on a little bit what you talked about in terms of generative AI being like an opportunity for leapfrogging, as you I think really elegantly put it. I was just sort of reflecting, the title of the session is about how are African startups building with generative AI, and a lot of it was a really interesting discussion just around generative AI in general. There's been some criticism of some of the large language models in terms of having bias or not being less familiar with different parts of the world, but just really interesting to understand as the people who are building generative AI for African startups, what are the challenges you see with localization or different business models and stuff, and kind of delving into a little bit more around the opportunities there as well.
That's a big question, good question. So I think specifically in my case, so we are building for Africa. We are using generative AI. I think what you have said about the LLMs is true. So LLMs is mostly built from things that exist in the internet, and a lot of the bias has come with it. Yeah. Just particularly if we look around how it thinks around inclusivity. So even just putting in a general, there's all sorts in there, which is just reflective of what's on the internet. And I think a lot of it is not inclusive. Yeah. It's not particularly local related. So if you're, for example, building for African students, it doesn't really understand that because a lot of that information is not online. But I think therein sort of lies the opportunity, right? And I think to previous person's question is, if everyone has access to the same technology and we're all able to do the same thing and it's all interesting, then it's really then becomes really around your unique understanding of the space, your unique understanding of the challenges, and then continuing to sort of build and fine-tune your sort of business model, your product to basically be able to cater to that. And so specifically in our case in education, even though we started quite broad-based, a lot of it now, our thinking every day is really about how do we make this subset work for this kind of user. And we know that the LLMs and all sort of big research companies and AI companies are very focused on how to do things faster, bigger, make it more intelligent. I think we're now officially as smart as a high school student, and it's going to be as smart as a PhD, but there's not very much thinking about how does this apply to African fintech or education or healthcare use cases. And that is why hopefully founders are like us are still sort of valuable in the world, and we have to continue building to just to do that work. And I think that's what we talk about. What are the the engineers and what are the product teams going to look like? And a lot of our work now is going to be that. It's going to be taking that and making it relevant for your user and your use case.
Yeah, I think Andrew's giving me the death stare. We're over on time. But just one last thing I'd leave with is, we kind of touched on it in the second question. A lot of the use cases that are being built are, again, backwards from customer problems in Africa. So we may not have taken a macro view to say, how will Gen AI solve, problems in Africa, but we're really working backwards from the businesses that are being run and serving African customers and solving those problems. And I think you heard a little bit about, where some of those key top items on the product roadmaps lie and where they're being used.
I will just quickly say, the reason we built our own facial recognition service, 5 years ago, was because everything out there wasn't trained for African faces, and our ML model is trained on African faces. We have white papers out there to say it's the best facial recognition for African faces. So, you still got to recognise, did I say, that use case, your customer base, and understand all of that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to my fellow panelists for the great panel and awesome insights.